So this recording is going to follow on from the perspective drawing we were doing earlier, and this is suitable for level 1, level 2, level 2 BTEC engineering, WJEC level 1, level 2 engineering, GCSE design and technology. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this object and we're going to turn it into an orthographic drawing, which is a drawing suitable for planning for manufacture. When I was sketching this, I wasn't working to specific measurement. This, is, if you remember, is probably a bent acrylic or pressed metal, bent metal screwdriver or pencil holder. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to turn that into a orthographic drawing. And if you remember, orthographic drawings have 3 views, usually as a minimum. You would have a front face, a plan view, and a side elevation. Those views work on the basis of rotating through 90 degrees. So if I look at that mouse there, I would then move it along and up to show the plan view, or I'd move it along, and in this case that would show the back of it. So your rotation is through 90 degrees. There is a method of using a 45-degree projection line. I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to work off measurements, but that's a good way of plotting lots of features. This is a relatively simple shape, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take you through constructing this drawing and doing some general dimensions, but I'm not going to go through things like title boxes or sort of really detailed drawing constraints, because what I'm thinking here is that this is useful for developing design ideas and communicating your design ideas. One step up from a sketch orthographic, but it won't be a fully detailed one because I don't want the video to be that long. I think getting into the idea of the overall dimensions is probably the key bit. So what we'll do is we'll construct this. I've given myself a 1 centimetre border already. I think these 1 centimetre borders are really important because that tells you that you've got the entire drawing. If you have a border, you know the full extent of it. Often you will see sort of sections on these drawings where you could do kind of a coordinate system. If you were on the phone to someone, you could talk about a particular area of the page. That's quite useful, but I'm keeping it simple here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure using just a ruler. I'm not using a set square. Technical drawing orthographic drawing is much easier with set squares and the correct drawing instruments, but we're going to do this with measurement today. Again, working in millimeters, and I've got a series of kind of measurements that I'll keep referring back to. So we are going to kind of repeat a drawing that I've already got, step by step, just to give you the kind of heads up on how to do it. So our first measurement is going to be 30 in from our 1 centimetre border. So if it's a 1 centimetre border, that would be in at 40. So you can decide where you're measuring from, whether you're measuring from the border or from the line. I'm going to measure from the line, from the border, and it was 30 and 30. Okay. So again, if you've got a set square, you've got a parallel motion, you don't have to worry about making things line up because it will do it for you. But in this case, remember, plot lines, projection lines, construction lines are done as lightly as possible. Hopefully you can just about see that. Okay, so we're going 30, and then I'm going to measure up 20 from there, and 20 is going to be my baseline of my drawing. And I'm going to just measure over here at 20 as well to give myself my baseline. Okay. Now again, if you had a parallel motion, you'd just whiz all the way through that. But this means it's going to help me line up my views. Okay, just check things are right. Nice light line. So that's basically going to be the bottom left-hand corner of my first view. My next view is going to be directly above it, aligned with it, and my other view is going to be aligned with it this way. So my baseline is really important to make sure that things line up correctly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to measure the overall width of the object, which is going to be 100, that's 10 centimeters. And again, because we're not using a set square, I'm also going to do 10 up here. Okay, so that was from that corner. That's 10, and that's 10. 100 mil. Draw 2 lines. Okay. Now, a common error when I see students doing this, a common error that I see is that they haven't got the views lined up with each other. And if you don't line them up properly, you're not going to be able to do the rest of the drawing properly. Alright, so if you're someone who's trying to take a shortcut, you can't shortcut this bit. That line has to go all the way up there, it has to be parallel, and one is going to form the front view, one is going to form the plan view, and they have to line up, otherwise it's incorrect. Okay, so if I look at our object now, we're going to come up from this corner. Remember, that's the bottom corner of our part. We're going to come up 50 mil. So 5 and 5. Check your measurements. Check that your pencil's sharp. Now this object's relatively easy, isn't it? Because it's all straight lines. If you were doing something a bit more curved, then you'd have to be looking at your high points and low points and trying to make sure things line up really carefully. This is relatively straightforward because this is about a method. If you were doing something more curved, you'd have to sort of plot coordinates in space a little bit more. But again, most things can be considered to be held within a box, and you then sort of carve and cut within that box. So, remember, if you look at our drawing, it's got these two little sort of side bits, flanges, tabs, whatever you want to call them. I'm going to work on the basis that this is 3mm acrylic, so I'm going to do that at 3mm. Okay, so all you would see on the side of our object is a 3mm thick rectangle. And this is, I think, probably one of the things you've got to get your head around a little bit when you're doing these drawings, is you don't always see tons and tons of detail because you're looking very, very straight on at something. And of course, in reality, we very rarely look directly at something. It's normally off to one side, or we have a 3/4 view or something like that. So it's very rare to see directly on. So there is the sides of that flange there, that tab, sitting against the side of that rectangle. So all you see is that kind of square, not square, polygon with another rectangular within it. Okay, so that's that. And that's actually pretty much that view finished. The only thing I'm going to do on here, just to help me kind of line things up, is I know that I'm going to have a 25mm spacing between the middle of each of my holes. So I'm going to just mark on the bottom here so that I can project up in a minute. 25, 50, 75. Remember, that's 100, so they're my 25mm increments. Okay, now the next object is going to be, the next view rather, is going to be above it. And again, one of the things that people sometimes make a mistake of is that they get their views and they're too close to an edge, or they come off the top of the page or something. So I quite often kind of sketch things out a little bit beforehand, and I've done that in this case. So we're actually going to move up 3.5 centimeters, 35mm from the top of this object. And it's the same object, it's a different view of that object. Check, that's 35, there you go. Project across. So again, if you think about this as the front view, the plan view, front view, plan view, front view, side view, they all have to line up properly. So this is actually just going to be looking straight down. Some people refer to it as the bird's eye view. Bird's eye are fish fingers. This is a plan view. Here we go. So my tab sticking out the side is 12. So I'm going to put that on 12. My width on top is 50. And then on top of that, it's the other tab on the other side is also 12. Okay, now all being well, I've got my line, 12, From that 12 I've got 50, from that 50 I've got 12. And then all I need to do is an exercise and join the dots. Nice and lightly. So again, parallel motion would make this easier, or a set square off the side of the page would make this much easier. We're doing it with the ruler. Hopefully it all lines up. It looks a little bit high to me there. Not too bad. My glasses sometimes make it a bit tricky to see, so using drawing instruments should tell me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just check that I've got 12 there. I do. Check that I've got 12 there. I do. So we'll call that fine. Alright, now all of this is keepers. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to darken in the edges of this object, because that's not going to change, and it sometimes helps if you're getting a little bit lost in your drawing. Sometimes helps to have a nice dark edge. Remember, I've said if you've watched my other videos, where we have an edge that goes over sort of like a cliff or changes plane, we would call that a falling away edge. And those falling away edges, the outside of the object, are often drawn with your thickest pen. And other lines are then narrower than that thickest one. So this would be something like 0.8 of a mil normally if you were using a pen. So my next line, this isn't really about light and dark, this is about thickness of line, but I'm going to just darken all of those in a bit. And the same on this object. Okay, side view, plan view. Side view, sorry, let's say front view, plan view, front view, side elevation now. Okay, so we're going to look at it end on, and I'm going to take that same measurement, 30, did that, 35, we're going to come to 35 here. So the space between my drawings, I'm going to do the same. That can be really important. It's about presenting your ideas clearly, so giving the information that you need. So if you remember that what I've got overall is this dimension here is 75. So our overall measurement here is 75. So hopefully you can realise why I'm measuring this drawing to give me that one, and that is because that object is the same there as it is there. That's the same measurement. Okay, so that's the relationship between those two parts. So that's 75 and that's 75. So we know these measurements here, don't we? We know that that's 12, 50 and 12. Okay, so I can actually do 12, 12, and in between, hopefully, we've got 50. Saying 12, I mean 75, it would be, I'm out by half a mil on either side, aren't I? And again, that's the sharpness of your pencil. So 12, 12 and 50 gives me 74. So when I'm measuring that, I've been a little bit hasty there, you can actually see that that is 74 there, and this is 74. Right, now, I mean, that's quite an important point, isn't it? If you're a manufacturer, you could read off the drawing and say, hang on, you've given me the incorrect information, and that measurement doesn't tie up with that measurement. Okay, and I've just proved that there. So 12, that was slightly more than 50, and then that was incorrect because it was following the 50. So you double checking your measurements and making sure they line up is a really important thing. So 12, 50 and 12. Now again, I've been drawing dark so that you can see it. if I'd drawn a little bit lighter, I wouldn't need to think about rubbing that out. Anyway, let's get moving. So we've got this 3mm line here, so I can project straight across. So I'll do that by lining up carefully here. Just do this. Okay, and that's going to be one corner. That's going to be just making sure I'm parallel with my edge there. Again, if I had a set square, I'd be doing it a bit carefully. Look at that. Now again, there's another check for me. I'm looking at my measurement there. Because I'm drawing it without drawing instruments, my 3mm is actually up to 4mm. So I'm going to just bring that down again. At this moment, now's the time. That line was obviously not parallel. Okay, so a little bit scruffy there, which is annoying, but I'm going to carry on. Now I'm going to plot upwards at this point, and I'm going to just measure off the edge of this page because that will make it make sense. So that is 47. So I'm just going to do 47 up here. So I'm measuring that internal line, 47 and 47, just to plot up. Okay, and then I'm going to come across 50 from there and plot up. Okay, so the reason that I did that 47 is that I didn't have a set square. If I had a set square, I'd have just lined it up with the edge of the page and drawn a straight line up. Basically, I'm just trying to create a vertical line. Okay, so the key bit is that we go 12 and then 50. Okay, now how tall is it going to be? I could measure, but actually again I can plot straight across. I can project across from here. Because it's the same height, because it's the same object. Alright, so we're now going to just plot that in, darken those in because those are falling away edges. Now I'm only going to do my outer edge here. We'll talk about that in a moment. Right, so at this point, this object is not, it has a thickness, it's not zero thickness, it has to have a thickness. So remember I was talking to you about the potential materials this might be made from. If it was mild steel, it would be 0.8. If it was aluminium, it would probably be 0.8, 1 mil, 1.2, potentially up to 2 mil thick. Very unlikely to be any thicker than that. If it was acrylic, it's probably going to be 3 mil thick. To give it some substance, you might get it at 2 mil, probably 3 though. So I'm going to stick with 3, just because it will make the drawing easier to read. So basically the interior of this now has to be offset from the outside by 3 mil. So that's going to take a little bit of careful measuring to get that right, and you'll see the end result. Think about your pencil sharpness as well. Okay, that looks pretty good. Again, the lighter you can do this, the less chance you have of making a complete mess of it, like I've done a couple of times on this drawing already. Small marks, sharp lines, light lines, and then you go over them afterwards. Top one is where I struggle. I'm going to turn it around for a minute. Okay, and then just darken that in because that's going to stay. So that thickness of the material is inside the overall object. This measures the outside, this gives us a chance to see inside. So that view gives some additional detail to that view. Alright. So what are we missing? Well, we're missing our square holes at the top. Okay, now if you remember, I made some marks in there, 25mm increments. I'm going to just measure halfway here first of all to give myself a sort of centre, and that's going to be 25 and 25. Okay, so I've now got a centre line running through there, and then onto that I'm going to mark 25, 50, 75. So those are my middle lines. So remember, I've done that at the bottom, 25, 50, 75, 25, 50, 75. And that just gives me a little centre line to plot from. Now if these were drilled as circles, you'd show a construction line with a centre line, and then you'd dimension those. So if they were drilled out of metal or drilled out of whatever material, you'd then know the center point, and you would have a radius or a diameter measurement from that. Because these are square, I could in theory have done my measurements straight up in one go, couldn't I? But I'm going to actually measure off my center 6 and 6 to give me 12, and 6 and 6 to give me 12. Okay, now here's a decision. I could either plot parallel with that, or I could just take another quick measurement here. Now I'm not going to draw all the way down here, but they're going to let me line up my ruler with this. And again, with a set square, you just slide your set square along and project straight up. But for me, 2 measurements, it's going to really help me get that parallel, which I think is worth doing with something like this. So I'm putting my pencil down on my mark because that helps me push my ruler up against it. So I'm actually using my pencil as a stop there. Just checking it all fits. Okay, so I didn't actually do any drawing down here. That was all about those lines at the top. So I now know how wide each of my squares is. All I'm left to do now is to do the same thing here. 6mm, 12mm, so 6 on either side. Okay, and then plot through. Now I only need to draw my line where it crosses the line there, and there, and there, to here, there. Okay, so those are my 12mm squares. I'm going to just darken those in. So, I mean, a manufacturing decision you'd have to make would be whether or not you want to do square holes or round holes. Now, probably round holes would be the easier option. Puts less stress on the materials. Easier to make a round punch than it is to make a square one. So I'm going with square mostly to give you a bit of a helping hand with your drawing. Probably if I was commenting on this as if it was a pencil holder, why not make it round? Also, that's going to wobble around. Also, it's missing something at the bottom, isn't it? So this is not a good design, and there's all sorts of good evaluation that you can do based on that. Now, our next step is really to do our overall dimensions. I'm going to dimension my width, my height, and my hole positioning. Alright, now probably to save confusing the drawing, I'm going to do my hole positioning on this drawing, this view here. I'm going to do my overall height on this drawing here. I'm going to show the tabs, I think, on this drawing here. And I think I will show my wall thickness here and possibly a couple of little bits on there as well. Okay, so what you don't want to do, unless you need to, you don't over dimension a drawing. You show what you need to show and you avoid too many dimension lines. But let's give you a couple of key pointers here. Limit lines don't touch the drawing. They show where you're measuring from and where you're measuring to. I'm going to do the overall width here. So my limit lines are going to be using my existing projection lines, and they're a reasonable length. They're not touching the drawing, and I try and do them about the same thickness. I think before, when I've talked to you about this, I've talked to you about using maybe the width of this bit on the ruler as a guide. It's up to you. And then my dimension line itself sits just inside the limit lines, parallel with the surface that or the measurement that I'm taking. And hopefully you can see that that's also not touching. And then a really nice little arrowhead. Okay, we're not pointing the directions, we're just showing where we're measuring from, where we're measuring to. And I'm going to write above the line 100. I don't need to write the unit of measurement because we always work in millimetres unless we say otherwise. So whilst I'm at it, wall thickness, I'm going to do a nice little limit line top and bottom of this one, because I'm not going to show much else on this drawing, so I might as well use this space. And because I can't fit my measurement into it, what I'm going to do is measure between 2 points. Okay, so I'm showing that I'm measuring between those two, and that is 3. Okay, so my measurements are all going to be on the same side, the same orientation, and you work left to right. That's how we read a book, so that's how we work left to right. Think about your orientation. You don't have your measurements going higgledy-piggledy all over the place. Try and be a little bit consistent with it. Okay, so I've shown that thickness there. I don't need to show it there. What I am going to do is to show my overall height. I think I'm going to show my overall height here. I could have done it over here, but I think, again, just to keep it simple, I'll take a limit line there. And there. So these are my limit lines, not touching. Tiny arrowheads. And then that was 50 overall. Okay, so look, my number should be in the middle. It's not quite in the middle there, is it? But not touching my line. 3, 150. That gives me my key dimensions for that part, which leaves me a good opportunity to dimension here the width of this offset. Now my limit line is going to come all the way to the top here, because I'm going to do 1, 2 and 3 measurements in one hit. So I'm going to do a long limit line. Okay, and then we're going to do 2 shorter ones here that are going to roughly I don't know why I use the word roughly then, because there's not going to be anything roughly about them. So the limit lines here are going to be in the same height as my other limit lines, but not touching the drawing. Okay, so this one measures from here to here, that one measures from there to there, this one measures from here to here. So that's where we use our arrow to show those measurements. Okay, so just darken that drawing in, that edge. It's a bit light, and that's where we call it line weight. Thickness and thinness is really important, so that you can make one part distinct from others. Okay, so that gives me my overall height, which was not my height, my width. That was 50. That was 12. And that was 12. That's quite important, that particular area, because when we talk about measuring that at 3 millimeters and having a wall thickness at 3, it's important to know that that wall thickness is actually on the inside of the part, as opposed to on the outside of the part, because it's not 53 or 56, is it? It's 50, and then your interior measurement is smaller. So again, I've got a couple of choices here. I'm going to just indicate at this point that that particular wall is 3. Okay, so I've shown it's 3 there. I've shown it's 3 there. I'm actually not going to indicate that that is 3 on any of my other views, because it's kind of clear, and anyone reading that would have an understanding of it. The other option that I had to choose from, I could have shown that that would have been 50 minus 3 and minus 3. Okay, so that could have been, I could have dimensioned that at 44. Because it's the same thing as 3 and 3, but I wanted to show that we're talking about wall thickness there. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to position my squares, and I'm going to measure from this edge. That's going to be my sort of starting point of these measurements. Don't know why that one's come out wonky. That's my limit line there. I'm going to use that as my final measurement there. And then for each one of these, I'm going to do a little limit line, but because I want them to all finish at the same length, I'll give myself a very, very faint position of that dimension line. Okay, I'm actually going to draw that in properly in a minute. But what I can now do you remember how we measured these 75, 25, 50 and 25, and then 12 overall? I'm going to use those again just as a means of doing my limit lines. Okay, so I'm going to measure here and here. I'm going to measure across, so I'm using my original plot lines Okay. And now I'm coming back in And so those were my limit lines. This is my dimension line. So again, my little arrows are not going to touch my limit lines. Little arrowheads. Okay, so I've got 12, 12, 12. So I've actually not checked that. So our spacing is 13 and 13. The other option would have been to measure one of these squares and then measure between centre lines to position that. Right, and then my first one began at 25. So I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, actually, do you know what? I've got some dimensional errors there. That's coming in at 18. And in theory, that should be the same as this one, shouldn't it? So I'd need to go back to my drawing board a little bit, and because that isn't showing me correct measurements, I'd need to go back and look at whether or not I'm dimensioning that properly. Okay, I'll do a little bit of calculation on that in a minute. And overall, all of your measurements should add up to 100. So I've got my overall height, I've got my overall width, I've got my wall thickness, I've got my tabs, I've got the overall width here, I've got that tab. I could show on here a little bit of hidden detail, so at 25 and then a little bit of hidden detail. I'm going to put a centre line in there. Now normally a centre line is used for cylindrical objects, but I think it's just worth having something just to indicate the middle of these holes. Okay, so as I say, I'm going to go back and check these dimensions and look at where I've offset it, because I obviously have probably a pencil thickness. Could make that adjustment. I'm not sure I'm going to with this drawing, if I'm really honest. So this should lead you into thinking about how your views are represented. I could show hidden detail there to show that wall thickness. If you were showing hidden detail, that would be a short dashed line. They call these marching ants in Photoshop. I always think of these as marching ants now. So a fine dashed line is your hidden detail. Not strictly necessary on this drawing. And then date it, label it, give it a title, and that's a basic orthographic drawing with your key measurements on there. There are some things that need improving, but as an overall sort of quick starting point, I think that's probably about half an hour. That's probably enough for now. Good luck with that.